I was 22, working my first summer as a counselor at Camp Winona, a small church-run camp on the west shore of a lake in the Pines, about 40 minutes past the last gas station on the county road. 2-week sessions, maybe 60 kids a session, 11 staff living on site in June and July. I ran the girls' side of Cabin 4 and helped Dale, the waterfront director, run evening swim. The job was mostly logistics. You learn the routine fast because the routine is the whole job. Wake bell at 7:15. Flag at Sieben. Breakfast, cabin cleanup, 3 activity blocks. Lunch, rest hour. 2 more blocks, dinner, evening swim at 6:30, when the light went gold and the water was still warm from the day. Lights out at 9:30. You do that for 14 days and your body knows where it's supposed to be without a watch. I also had a shed key. The supply shed sat behind the dining hall, plywood walls, a padlock, shelves of the boring things a camp goes through. Sunscreen, mosquito coils, spare canoe paddles, first aid restock, the good archery arrows we didn't let the kids lose. I opened it every morning to pull sunscreen and closed it every night. The first wrong detail was the paddles. I stacked them a specific way, blade down in the corner rack, because Dale is particular about it, and I got tired of hearing about it. On the 5th morning of second session, they were blade up. I stood there with the sunscreen bottles under my arm, trying to remember if I'd been sloppy the night before. Decided I probably had, and restacked them. It was 7:20 in the morning, and I had 60 kids to sunscreen. 2 days later, the coil of yellow rope we used to mark the swim line was on the wrong shelf, and a box of granola bars from the kitchen overflow was open, 4 or 5 gone. I mentioned it to Dale. He said kids sneak the shed all the time, that a bored 12-year-old will pick a padlock with a bobby pin for the story of having done it. That made sense. It made sense. Or I wanted it to. What I didn't tell him was the padlock. It was a combination lock, not a keyed one, and only 3 staff had the number. A kid with a bobby pin doesn't open a combination lock and then close it again on the right numbers behind them. But I didn't want to be difficult in my second week, so I let Dale's version stand, and I changed the combination that afternoon and told myself that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. 2 mornings after I changed the number, the granola box was open again. Then the kids started talking about the tall man. It came up at evening swim, the way things come up with kids, sideways, half joking, in the middle of something else. One of my Cabin 4 girls, Priya, said she'd seen a man standing back in the tree line by the far dock while everyone was in the water. Tall, she said. Just standing. When I looked, he wasn't there, and I told her it was probably one of the maintenance guys, and she said the maintenance guys wear the green shirts, and this man didn't. Then a boy from Cabin 2 said he'd seen him too, a different evening. Same spot. Same tall. I want to be honest about how I took this. I didn't take it seriously. Kids at camp see things at dusk, they feed each other stories, and there is always a tall man. I logged it in my head as camp folklore, and I ran the swim. What changed it was the wrappers. There's an old cabin at the north end of the property, past the archery range, that we don't use. The floor was condemned years back, and they just chained the door instead of tearing it down. Cabin 9. I went up that way on a rest hour looking for a frisbee a kid had chucked into the brush, and I noticed the lattice skirting under the cabin's crawl space had a panel pushed loose. Not broken. Pushed aside and set back, the way you'd move something you meant to move again. I crouched down and looked in. There was a person's shape pressed into the dirt under there. A flattened place, the size of a body, with a folded blue tarp for a floor and a rolled sweatshirt at one end for a pillow. Food wrappers, The same granola bars, gas station stuff, an empty water jug. It was tidy. That's the part one. Keep coming back to. Nobody desperate keeps a tidy nest. This was somebody who lived there on purpose and cleaned up after himself so it would keep. I should have gone straight to the director. I know that now, and I half knew it then. But I was 22, and it was my first summer, and I did not want to be the counselor who called the whole camp into a panic over a homeless guy sleeping under a condemned cabin. So I reached in, because there was something else, a spiral notebook, the cheap kind, wedged against the tarp under the pillow. I pulled it out, and I opened it. It was a log. Dated entries, days at a time, going back weeks, back before second session, back into the first 2-week block. Not sentences. Times and movements. Waterfront 6:37:45. Kitchen light off 10:10. Shed open 7:20, closed 8:55. Which cabins had counselors who did a real bed check and which ones went straight to their own bunk. When the maintenance men left for the day. When the director drove out for supplies and how long he was gone. Weeks of it. In a small tight hand, patient, like a man doing a job he'd get up and do again the next day. He knew our routine better than a new hire would. He knew it the way I knew it, by living inside it. And on the last page, the most recent entry, the handwriting was the same, but the subject wasn't the schedule anymore. It was me. Cabin for counselor, it said. My height near enough. What time I opened the shed and what time I closed it. That I walked the north path alone on rest hours. That I'd found the panel, he'd written that I'd found the panel, 2 days before I ever crouched down to look, which meant he had watched me notice it and hadn't moved. The last line was 3 words. She's the one. I don't remember standing up. I remember I was already walking, fast, then not walking, down the path with the notebook against my chest and the trees very loud with insects and the whole back of my neck telling me the tree line was not empty. There was a sound off to my right, in the brush past the path, steps, soft and even, keeping my pace. When I stopped, the brush went still, and there was no wind to move it. I did not turn around to check. That is the one smart thing I did that day. I did not stop to confirm it. I got to the office, and I put the notebook on the director's desk, and I could not make my voice work at a normal volume. They cleared the camp that night. We walked the kids to the dining hall and kept them singing while the director called the sheriff. The deputies went through cabin 9 with real lights, photographed the crawl space, and bagged the notebook. The nest was empty. He wasn't in it. The tarp was still warm. One of the deputies said that. Quiet to another deputy, and I heard it anyway. Warm. It meant that somewhere in the 20 minutes between me pulling out the notebook and the county cars turning in at the gate, he had gotten up off that tarp and walked away, and that all summer neither of us had been more than a few hundred feet from the other. They searched the woods with a dog, but they never found him. No name, no car, no report that matched. The camp shut the session down early, and I drove out past that last gas station and did not slow down until I was on the interstate. Here's the part 1. Couldn't tell the deputies. He didn't need to be a ghost. He just needed us to keep the routine. And we did. Gladly. 60 kids and 11 adults keeping perfect time for anyone patient enough to watch. I never went back for a second summer. I still don't know what she's the one was the start of. The notebook stopped at that line because that was the last night he had to write in it, and I've never been able to decide whether that means I got out in time or whether the log just ends where the plan stopped being something you write down. I was 19 that summer, working as a lifeguard at a public beach on the north end of Sable Lake, and the county put us up in a row of staff cabins about a mile down the shore road. 6 cabins, cedar-sided, numbered with brass tacks that had gone green. I had number 4. The job was easy money. I'd sit the chair from 10 to 6, blow the whistle at kids who ran on the dock, and walk home along the water when the last car left the lot. That walk was the best part of the day. July light stays up late that far north. The road hugged the shoreline, gravel on one side, black spruce on the other, and by closing the lake would go completely flat and gold. I did it 100 times. I never once thought about it. The first time I noticed him, I told myself he was a fisherman. It was a Tuesday, maybe the 3rd week of July. I came out of the guard shack around 6:15, and there was a man standing where the gravel lot met the road near the boat launch. Older, 40s, maybe 50s. Gray canvas jacket, too heavy for the heat. He wasn't fishing. He didn't have a rod. He was just facing the water with his hands in his pockets, and when I started up the shore road, he started too, 40 feet back, matching my pace. I walked faster. He walked faster. When I slowed to let him pass, he slowed. He never came closer than that 40 feet, and he never called out, and when I reached my cabin and got the door shut and looked through the window, the road was empty. I decided he'd turned off somewhere. There were driveways. It was nothing. He was there the next night. Same gray jacket, same spot by the launch, though it must have been 80 degrees at 6 o'clock. And the night after that, by the end of the week, I'd stopped pretending. Every closing shift, same spot by the launch, same gray jacket, same 40 feet. He'd fall in behind me the second I hit the road, and he'd hold that distance the whole mile. And the moment I got inside, he'd be gone by the time I looked. I told the head guard, a guy named Glenn, who'd worked the lake for years. He said the launch was public and he couldn't run a man off for standing on a road. He said walk with someone. So I did, for 2 nights, and both nights the man wasn't there, and the 3rd night alone again he was. That's the part 1 kept turning over. He knew when I was alone. Not that he watched from close, he never once broke the 40 feet, but that he could read the road from all the way back there, could tell from the shape of 2 people versus 1, whether tonight was worth it. It made him patient, in a way I couldn't argue myself out of being afraid of. There's a detail I have to explain. A week before any of this started, they'd moved me. I'd spent the first month of the season in cabin 5, the last one in the row, closest to the tree line. Then the county shuffled the housing, some paperwork things, seniority, and I got bumped down to cabin 4. Same as before, 1 door over. 5 sat empty after that. Nobody took it. It just stood there dark at the end of the row with its curtains still up. I didn't think it mattered. It's the only reason I'm alive, and I didn't think it mattered. The last night, I did everything right. I told Glenn I was scared. I called the county sheriff's line from the guard shack, and a dispatcher took my name and said a deputy would swing through the shore road on patrol, which meant sometime, which meant not now. I waited until another guard could walk with me, a girl named Kayla, and the man wasn't at the launch, and I felt stupid and relieved in equal amounts. Kayla peeled off at cabin 2. I did the last stretch alone. 40 feet back, the gravel started to crunch. I didn't turn around. I walked to cabin 4. I put my key in the deadbolt, and I got inside, and I threw the bolt, and I stood in the dark with my back against the door and my heart going like a whistle. And then the footsteps didn't stop at my door. They went past. I heard him climb the 2 wooden steps of cabin 5. I heard him try the handle, and then I heard him hit the door, a shoulder, a boot. I don't know, but the whole thin wall between us shook with it. and he was saying a name. Over and over, louder each time he threw himself at that door. Dana. Dana, open it. I know you're in there, Dana. My name is not Dana. I got down on the floor of cabin 4 with my phone, and I called the sheriff's line back, and I couldn't get my voice under the number I needed it at. I told her a man was breaking into the cabin next to mine. She kept asking, was anyone inside it? And I kept saying, no, it's empty, it's empty. And I could hear him working the door of an empty cabin, looking for a woman named Dana, who wasn't there, and never had been, not while I lived one wall away from her ghost. The wood gave. I heard cabin 5's door come open. I heard him go inside. And then I heard him stop. Because there was no one in there. Just a bare mattress and my old dresser and the curtains I'd left up. He went quiet. For a long time, a minute, 2, there was nothing at all. Just the loons out on the water, and I lay on my floor certain the next sound would be him at my door instead. The deputy's headlights came up the shore road at 11:52. I know because I'd been watching the clock on my phone. The man didn't run. That's the thing nobody tells you they sometimes do. He was still standing in the dark of cabin 5 when they found him, and he went with them without a word. Dana was the guard who'd had cabin 5 before me, most of the previous summer and into the fall. The man had known her, sort of. A fixation. A restraining order in another county that had lapsed. When he came looking for her this July, he had a full year of old information. Her job, her lake, her cabin at the end of a row of 6. He'd been watching the shore road for the woman who lived in cabin 5. But I'd moved. A week before he arrived, a seniority shuffle put me in 4 and left 5 dark. So he watched the young woman walking home from the beach every night and built his whole plan around her. And when the night finally came, he went to the door he'd decided on a week too late. The empty one. He'd been aiming at cabin 5 the entire time. My walks, my 40 feet, my racing hard on the shore road, every evening, none of it had ever been about me. I had just been the shape moving through the picture he was trying to fix on someone else. I think that's supposed to be a relief. I was never the target. It comes out of people's mouths like it should help. You were never really in danger. It was a mix-up. It was her he wanted. And every time it drops the floor out from under me a little further. Because it means the whole thing ran on nothing. On a filing error and a green brass number 4. If the county hadn't moved me, he'd have gone to the right door and found me behind it, and I never would have known I wasn't Dana. They never found Dana. The address they had for her was a year stale, same as everything else he was working from. Wherever she went after that summer, she went far enough that he couldn't reach her, and far enough that when the sheriff's office tried to warn her what had happened at Sable Lake, they couldn't reach her either. So somewhere out there is a woman who has no idea a man drove all that way and broke down a door in the dark, screaming her name into an empty room I used to sleep in. And there's me, who heard every second of it through one cedar wall and got to keep it. I'd trade her the not knowing. Most nights I was 20, finishing my sophomore year at a state school, 2 hours inland, and the plan was Marcus's. He'd found a stretch of state park beach up the coast that let you camp in the dunes on a first-come permit, $9 a night, self-registered at a plywood kiosk with a slot for the envelope. We printed the reservation off the park website at the campus library the Thursday before, because Marcus swore a ranger had ticketed him once for not having the paper on him. I folded the printout into my back pocket and forgot about it. We got there Friday around 6. The lot held maybe a dozen cars, most of them day trippers who'd be gone by dark, and by the time we'd hauled the cooler and the 2-person tent and the case of water over the last dune, We couldn't see any of them. That was the whole point. No hookups, no bathhouse, no camp host, just a mile of packed sand and beach grass, and the water going gray-orange as the sun dropped behind us. We set up in a low spot between two dunes so the wind wouldn't flatten the tent, ate hot dogs off a little propane stove, drank warm beer out of the cooler, and talked about nothing, girls, finals, whether Marcus should switch his major, until the tide came up and the mosquitoes found the spot and chased us into the tent around 11. I remember the specifics because I've gone over them so many times, the way you replay a car accident. The tent door faced the water, east, so the wind off the ocean pushed the rainfly flat against the poles all night, a steady low flutter like a flag on a pole. We were maybe 40 yards up from the high tide line, and the last light I saw before I fell asleep was the beam of the lighthouse a couple miles down the coast, sweeping the ceiling of the tent every few seconds, slow and regular, red, then dark, then red. There was no other campsite within sight of us. I remember thinking, right before I went under, how good it was to be somewhere with nobody around. Marcus fell asleep first. He always did. I woke up because the flutter changed. Not louder. Just interrupted. A rhythm cutting across the wind that didn't belong to the wind. I lay there with my eyes open in the dark and told myself it was the fly working loose, a stake pulling out of the sand. I even reached up and pressed my palm flat against the nylon to feel for slack. That's when I heard the footsteps. Sand doesn't creak or snap. It's the quietest ground there is. But someone walking slow across dry sand makes a soft, deliberate crush, a compression. And once you've heard it in the dark 40 inches from your head, you can't mistake it for anything else. Whoever it was, they were close, right up against the tent. And they were walking a circle. I could track them by ear from the water side around the north corner of the tent, past the guy line I'd staked out that afternoon, behind our heads around the south side, back to the front. Unhurried. Even the way you'd walk around a car in a parking lot, looking it over, deciding, and there was a second sound underneath the footsteps. A long, dragging hiss against the sand, heavier than a foot. Something being pulled or carried low. It kept pace with the steps, and every time the steps stopped, the dragging stopped a half second later, like whatever it was got set down and then picked up again. I lay there and made a list in my head of everything that could make that sound, and every item on the list was worse than the one before it. I checked my phone without lifting it off the floor. 3:02 a.m. I reached over and put my hand on Marcus's arm and squeezed until he stirred, and I got my mouth right next to his ear and breathed. There's someone outside, don't move. I felt him go rigid. He'd heard it too, or he heard it the second he stopped being asleep. Neither of us said anything else. We just lay there, two grown men in a nylon box, listening to the circle tighten. The footsteps came around to the front, to the door, and stopped. For a while, I don't know how long, my sense of time was gone. There was nothing but the wind and the fly snapping and the sound of my own pulse in my ears. Then the zipper started to move. Our tent had one of those double pull zippers, a loop of cord on each tab, and the door zipped up from the bottom in an inverted U. Whoever was out there had found the bottom pull. They weren't yanking it. They were lifting it, one tooth at a time. I could hear each individual click as the tab climbed. Tick. A pause. Tick. A pause. Slow enough that between each one I had time to think a complete useless thought. He knows we're in here. He knows we're awake. He's doing it slow, so we'll be quiet. I don't know what I thought was going to happen when it reached the top. I couldn't find my voice. My whole body had made the animal decision to be as still and small as possible, which is the opposite of what you'd want to do, and I could not override it. Marcus's hand found mine in the dark and gripped it so hard I felt the bones move. The zipper climbed to about the height of my chest, and then the whole inside of the tent lit up. Headlights. A wide sweeping wash of white that came across the dunes from the direction of the access road, throwing the shadow of the beach grass across our tent wall in long moving spikes. A truck. I heard the engine after, the diesel rattle of it, coming down the frontage road that ran behind the dunes, its high beams raking the whole beach as it took the curve. The zipper stopped. For 1 second, the light held the silhouette of a person on the other side of the door, close, life-sized, a head and shoulders, and then the person turned and walked away. Not running. Not startled. Just walking, down the slope toward the water, and then north up the beach, at the same even pace they'd circled us with. Like a man leaving a bus stop. The truck passed. The light swung off us. And the dark came back down, and he was gone into it. We didn't move for a long time. When I finally got the courage to unzip the door the rest of the way and look out, there was nothing there but our own gear and the flattened sand. No shape on the beach. The tide had come up enough that if he'd kept walking north along the waterline, the water would have taken his prints. We packed the tent in the dark with shaking hands, poles half collapsed, the whole thing stuffed loose into the trunk with the stakes still hanging off the guy lines, and we walked back over the dunes fast without talking, both of us looking north the whole way. We drove to a gas station off the highway and sat in the fluorescent lot with the doors locked until the sun came up, and around 7 we called the county sheriff and reported it. A deputy met us in the parking lot and took it down on a clipboard. He was decent about it, didn't make us feel stupid, but there was nothing to go on, no description past a person, no vehicle, nothing taken, no prints once the tide had been over the sand. He wrote it up as a prowler and told us people camping out there sometimes got hassled by locals who didn't like sharing the beach, and that we'd probably scared each other more than anybody'd meant to scare us. We drove home. For a while I told the story a few times at parties as a scare. Did the voice, did the slow zipper, and then I mostly stopped, and I stopped thinking it meant anything at all. Then, that fall, 5, maybe 6 months later, Marcus called me. His voice was strange. He told me to look up a name in the news. A man had been arrested up the coast, maybe 8 miles north of where we'd camped. The same week we'd been there, I checked our dates against the article twice, and they overlapped. A trooper had stopped him on the highway late one night for a busted taillight, and something about how he acted led to a search, and in a backpack behind the driver's seat they'd found zip ties, a folding knife, a roll of duct tape, and a headlamp. On its own, that gets you a bad afternoon and not much else. Plenty of people carry that stuff in a truck. What made the paper months later, when he was charged in connection with a woman who'd gone missing from a different campground down the shore, was the inventory of what else was in his pockets and his glove box. One of the items logged into evidence was a printed campsite reservation. For our beach. For our permit number. For our nights. The one I'd folded into my back pocket at the library, and never once took out because I still had mine. I found it that afternoon in the glove box, soft and worn at the creases, exactly where I'd left it. His was a second copy. I have never figured out how he got it, or when, or whether he'd stood at that plywood kiosk and read our envelope in the slot and copied the number down, or something else I don't want to think about. The reservation had our names on it. I called the sheriff's office, and it took 3 tries to get put through to anyone who knew the case, and eventually a detective called me back. He was careful with me. He confirmed the reservation was in evidence, that it had our permit number and our names, and that they'd flagged it and tried to reach us months back at an old address I'd since moved out of. He said they couldn't tie the man to that specific night, no camera, no print, and the man wasn't talking, that the beach thing would likely never be charged on its own, that I should try to put it behind me. He was kind about it. He asked me twice if I was doing okay, but near the end of the call he went quiet for a second, and then he said the thing I still hear when I can't sleep. He said the truck that came around the curve at 3 that morning, whoever they were, probably has no idea what they interrupted. To this day, I don't know who was driving it. Zip your tent tonight. It won't matter, but do it anyway.